Well, Dr. Iain McGilchrist is a man with two brains, and he's brought both of them tonight. And the good news is you've also got two brains, and they'll explain to some extent how all that works. He's an author, The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. He's a former fellow of All Souls College of Psychiatrists, former research fellow in neuroimaging at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Dr. Gilchrist, please join us.
Well, thank you very much. I suppose the topic is, what can science and technology do to help us with our problems? And I suppose what I'd like to draw attention to is some of the things that it can't be doing. Although I spent a long time, 20 years, looking at the brain and thinking about what it is exactly the brain is and what it does and how it does it, I'm not one of those people who's going to tell you what the real truth about something is if I've described it at the brain level. Do you remember there was that terrific excitement when they found the brain circuitry that was associated with falling in love? Well, it was a terrific relief, actually, because until that moment we didn't really know whether people fell in love or not. And there is a sort of sense in which a mindless kind of charisma attaches to an explanation in scientific terms, which is in itself not particularly helpful. It's just a description at another level. I do think, however, that looking at the brain can tell us things about the limits of our thinking and about different ways in which we think, and it can help us see things together that otherwise we wouldn't have noticed work together. So it can't tell us anything we really couldn't have told by patient observation of human behavior. We would probably have seen these patterns ourselves, but in an age in which we're less and less able to understand implicit knowledge, it helps to make explicit at a sort of concrete level that is perhaps better adapted to the way we think now, the relations between things. But it doesn't go to tell us what to do with our knowledge. We heard about a Greek word techne, which really means know how. But there are two other very important questions we should be asking. What and why? As I explained to you, or suggested, describing something at brain level doesn't tell you what it is. You can't sort of second guess phenomena at the human level. We all live as human beings in a human world, and what we do and how we react and how we act in relation to one another is a human matter. And one of the things that worries me is that we are more and more losing a context which scientists inevitably used to have until about 50 years ago. The great scientists of the past, the great inventors too, were all brought up in an era in which it was impossible not to have a humane education, not to have some background in philosophy, in the history of mankind, and in what we would broadly call the arts. And that actually is very important for orientating us to the big questions of our lives: how we should live, what our goals in life should be, who human beings are, what the planet actually is. And if we don't ask these questions, we get some very simplified, reduced and crude answers. So science is a tool, and a tool is as good as the person that uses it and the aims that that person has. So the real questions are, what is it that we want? We heard a lot about how we can increase our longevity. Wonderful. But if we don't really know what we're doing when we're living, and life seems more and more meaningless, as apparently people find it to be these days compared with their parents and grandparents, what is the point in ever more feverishly hanging on to a bit more and a bit more and a few more years? I'm reminded of that Woody Allen joke about two women sitting in a boarding house discussing the food, and one says, "Such awful food," and the other one says, "Yes, and such small portions." And he says, "Yes, and life's a bit like that. If the food's so awful, why do we want longer portions of it?" So I think the brain can tell us marvelous and interesting things, but it needs to be seen in a broad perspective. It needs to be understood as part of a person. And unfortunately, as I think Brian, sorry, is it Brian? Yes, who was introducing us.
Robyn.
Robyn was, who was introducing us, hinted, there are too many people not talking to one another and not really understanding the whole picture. It's not just that the sciences and the humanities don't really understand one another. There's a lot of window dressing about this. You know, prestigious scientists are really not a star until they've collaborated with a ballet dancer. And a performance artist is not really ever quite at the top of their game until they've collaborated with a neuroscientist. But I'm not talking about this kind of thing. This is really just a kind of publicity. I'm talking about a real and genuine understanding of two different approaches, if you like, to the world. So as well as techne, there is phronesis and there is sophia, two very important Greek words. Sophia, wisdom, and phronesis, the practical wisdom which knows how to apply things, when, where, and to what ends. I'd just like to leave you with those thoughts.
Thank you very much, Iain. And Jason Drew from South Africa, international business leader, serial entrepreneur, that's spelt with an S, which means he's an entrepreneur serially, and sustainability expert, former CEO of a JSE listed business, chairman of AgriProtein, author of The Protein Crunch, Civilization on the Brink, as you heard just now. Please join us. Choose your seat.
I used to be very simple. I was an entrepreneur and a capitalist. I'm now an environmental entrepreneur and an environmental capitalist. I sold all of my Industrial Revolution businesses in 2008, and since then I've been looking for wicked environmental problems and brilliant environmental solutions and businesses out of those. I was going to focus on one particular area just to give you an example of the sort of things that I get up to. One of the certainties about this planet is our population. Every single day there are 100 million acts of sexual intercourse. 374,000 children are born. 170,000 of us die. That means that this evening, 204,000 more people are sitting down for supper than had breakfast this morning. Now, how on earth are we going to feed 9 billion people? So there's a couple of solutions that I come across into this business area. The first is around protein, food. A third of all the fish we take out of our seas, 27.5 million tons a year, is ground up and made into fish meal to feed our chicken farms, to feed our fish farms, to feed our cats and dogs. It's the cheapest form of animal protein. In fact, it's not really fishing anymore, it's catching since the invention of sonar. We just go out to the sea, we know where the fish are, we take them out of the sea, and we grind them up. Yet there's another solution. One of my businesses, AgriProtein, takes slaughterhouse waste. That's the blood and guts from slaughterhouses. There's as much good in the bits of a chicken you throw away as the bits you eat. It's just we don't like the blood and guts, but flies do. So we have immense cages of flies. At any one time, we probably have 500 million flies, which makes us the biggest farmer on the planet of any type of animal. And we take the eggs from those flies, and we feed them the blood and guts. Now, the fly larvae disinfects, consumes the protein, and turns into a wriggly larvae. Now, as any fisherman in the world will tell you, there's only two ways of catching a fish. One is with a fly on the end of a line, and the other is with a maggot on the end of a hook. Now, instead of raping our seas, we are now making a sustainable, natural animal protein for chickens and fish out of waste. Nutrient recycling will be one of the great industries of the sustainability revolution. We take it for granted today that we should recycle our paper, our tin, and our plastic. Within a decade, we will think nutrient recycling is a given. So that's a business out of a wicked problem with a wicked technological solution. The other thing we've done, it came out of the fly business, in fact. I was investigating flies, and we had large cages of flies with half boys and half girls. Now, I'm no farmer, but I've never seen 12 bulls with 12 cows in a field. I also worked out that boys don't lay eggs. So we wanted to separate this out. So I went to find the guys who'd written the genome of the fly. It was the second animal after the human to have its genome mapped. Why? Because flies exist on every continent where there are humans. Actually, the answer wasn't genetic. But the guys had found a wonderful business solution to pesticides. Now, pesticides are disastrous things. They ruin entire ecosystems. They're necessary so that we can get our cotton T-shirts at $5 a time. But they are an industrial revolution way of dealing with a problem, which is we need monocultures, therefore it attracts large amounts of pests. These guys have developed a very interesting alternative, which has now become quite a substantial business. In fact, this year we will sell and export nearly 1 billion mosquitoes from Oxford in the UK to 7 countries around the world. But one of the solutions, and I'll talk about mosquito another time, in particular is the cotton bollworm. Now, the cotton bollworm affects cotton fields from Pakistan to the Americas to everywhere else. If you go through a cotton field today, they are completely inert. There is no life in them. There's no birds, there's no mice, there's no snakes, there's nothing, because pesticides have wiped out the entire ecosystem around cotton fields. You go to one of our cotton fields, and there's everything there except the cotton bollworm. What these guys had invented first was a genetic stain. So a gene that stains the protein, the meat content of the cotton bollworm, red under ultraviolet light. The second was a sterility gene for the mosquito and for the cotton bollworm. So what we do is we release sterile male cotton bollworms into cotton fields. They mate with the wild females. Their offspring never hatch. So for one generation, which is 5 to 6 weeks, we keep the cotton bollworms out of the cotton field. Why this is a great technology is 2 reasons. Firstly, the only thing you cannot inherit in this world is sterility, because if your parents were sterile, you would never have been born. It also makes it a business, because every 6 weeks you need to come and buy more mosquitoes or more cotton bollworms from us rather than pesticide from Monsanto. So just to give you that one small example of all the things we're doing, I'm not a complicated guy, I'm just a doer. I'm taking some of the great technology, finding great solutions for it, and making things happen. Thank you.
Thank you.